Hello everyone and welcome to this Kids Matter webinar, Mental Health Matters for Adults Too. And this really is a time to take some time to have a think about ourselves. Welcome to today, and it's great to see all of you here at the moment. Before we begin, I'd like to give a brief outline about what Kids Matter Early Childhood is. We're a mental health initiative that's across Australia, and we're funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue. And we've grown into the great initiative that we are today through a partnership between Early Childhood Australia, Beyond Blue and the Australian Psychological Society. So we've been working really hard to bring lots of positive mental health messages to Australia for a number of years now. And we've been in this webinar space for a little while, and I can see already today that we've had a few people who are new to our webinars. So feel free after the webinar to check out our Shared Thinking blog and check out a few of our previous webinars as well. So before we go any further, I just want to remind everyone that everyone who attends today will receive a certificate if they've attended the live event. So there'll be an exit survey at the end where you can actually pop in the names of people who are with you if you're watching as a group. Another little thing just to remember is the chat box you can actually minimise or expand by clicking on the little triangle to the right of the text box that's there. So you can make the chat disappear if it's a bit too much for you, or you can expand it to make it a little bit bigger so you can see as much more. So before I introduce you to our presenters, I would like to acknowledge that today we're meeting on many lands, and I would like to pay my respects to Elders past, present and future for the continuing custodianships of the land and the children of this land across the generations. I'd also like you today to think about how children are influenced in their surroundings and how we can influence them. And also ask you what kind of influence you'd like to be and how you will actually model self-care in your environment for younger children. So that brings us on to the whole topic of today, but just as a little lead-in, I'd like to also just pop in there a brief comment about self-care. A few years ago, as a Kids Matter facilitator, I'd often talk about the importance of self-care in terms of when we get onto an aeroplane, we get told to pop our air mask on first if we're lacking oxygen, that sort of stuff, and then help the people around us. Self-care is a bit like that. It's about making sure that we're breathing right and that we're going okay so that we can actually help people around us. The other thing I've recently found on Facebook, being the Facebook fan that I am, there was a post that came up that talked about you can't pour from an empty cup. So in that sense, if we've got something in our cup, so if we've got something to give in our cup, we're able to pour from it. But we need to keep replenishing our cup so that we can keep caring for not only ourselves but each other. So today, Sandy and Steve will be offering us many tips and strategies for self-care. So I'm very excited to hear all the different tips that they've got to offer for us. And hopefully you'll be able to actually use this experience to support yourself and other people and your future conversations to continue making self-care a priority and be seen as this as a priority and not as an indulgence or any sort of selfishness, but historically that has sometimes happened. So today, please remember to take care of yourself, and especially because we are talking about mental health today, all kinds of feelings can emerge, even difficult ones. So we will be asking you to contribute today. So in an essence for self-care, please just only contribute what you feel comfortable doing and what you feel okay about. And please be aware of confidentiality because there are many people watching and potentially listening in the future as well. If something does feel uncomfortable for you, please use one of the phone numbers on our self-care page. And this can help you reach a professional or contact a support person as soon as you can. So these are some of the places that people do seek to get extra support as well. So I'm going to pop off the screen and I'll pop back again for some chats. And I'm going to introduce you now to our facilitator for Kids Matter, one of the team, Sandy Clark, who's going to get the ball rolling. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, Amelia, and thanks very much. Sorry, I shall move it on. And welcome everyone to this webinar. It's great to be with you all here today to share and to learn about caring for our own mental health and wellbeing. Look, certainly an attitude of curiosity, reflection and openness to learning all support mental health and wellbeing. So I would really like to acknowledge you for investing in your ongoing learning and wellbeing today. And I'm curious, I'd like to hear why. Why have you tuned in today and what would you like to get out of it today? Maybe you could write about that and let me know in the chat. I'll just move on one slide. Okay. So Kids Matter is an initiative about early childhood mental health and recognises the importance of significant adults in children's lives. Today, our focus is on the adults who work with children. And recognising that the workplace is an important part of our daily lives, being aware of how to look after ourselves and support each other can make a huge difference to each of us and to the wellbeing of our team. Everyone's got a role to play in creating a mentally healthy workplace, and simple actions can make a big difference. So we're going to be considering how to be mentally healthy from those two perspectives, what we can do for ourselves and how we can operate as a team and support each other. As we go through, we'll be having some polls and some reflective questions throughout the session to provide opportunities for everyone to be involved, share strategies and set some goals, and also a guest speaker. So what we were hoping that you would take away from today is really an understanding that looking after our own mental health is important for ourselves, but it also affects the mental health and wellbeing of the children in our lives. An understanding of how we can each play a role in supporting the professional resilience of our colleagues and ourselves, and one strategy from each of those sections that I mentioned before about how to support our own mental health and wellbeing. So really, yes, just be able to go away and recognise what are the basics in your life that support your mental health and wellbeing. Just diverting a bit from the slideshow at the moment to say that certainly by preparing for this webinar, I've been reminded about what some of the basics are in my life and what I need to remember in order to look after my own mental health and wellbeing. And we'll share that as we go through. So for now, I would like to introduce you to our special guest speaker today, Steve McDonald. I have worked with Steve about 5 years ago. He was working as a WA State Manager for Kids Matter Primary and Mind Matters. And earlier this year, he moved into the private sector as an organisational psychologist and director with a company called Kaya. He has a huge interest in the wellbeing of the workplace and team functioning. He looks at teams functioning at their peak. So I'm going to hand over to Steve now to introduce this model.
Thanks, Sandy, and welcome everybody, and thank you for giving up your time today. As Sandy said, it's a very important part of our own wellbeing. So this model that I have on the screen is something that we use when we're talking to any kind of organisation, whether it's schools or corporates or early childhood centres, around a way of understanding wellbeing and being conscious about the work that we do. It comes from a book called Conscious Business by Fred Kaufman, and the argument he makes in the book is that in every business there are three parts of that business that will make it successful, or three parts that will look after people's wellbeing. The first is the it, and the it, which is the big circle at the moment, is the idea of the work that we actually do. So in terms of the work that we're doing in early childhood centres, looking after the children, teaching the children, interacting with parents, the work that we're trying to do, the it is what separates an accountant from a teacher, from a lawyer, from any other type of organisation, and obviously it's an important part. The other two parts are important as well. So the we is the space, the way we like to call it, the space between us. So this is actually what creates the culture. This is when we're working and talking with each other. This is the agreements that we have as a team. And then the I is the individual, so that's my own well-being. So in the sense of understanding well-being, we space is the space that's between us, and what are we doing as a group to look after our well-being? And the I is the idea of what am I doing myself to look after my well-being. All three of these are important. Typically, what happens in all of our work is that we spend most of our time focusing on the it, maybe a little bit of time on the we, and very little time on the I. And workshops like today are really about saying the it is important, but the we and the I are just as important. And in fact, if we don't focus on our own well-being, we're not going to be in a great place in our teams, and therefore our workplaces are going to suffer. So all three are equally important. So what our hope is over the course of the next hour or so is that we start to have some really good conversations around the we space and the I space, and remembering this is a starting of a conversation or a continuing of a conversation for most of us as well. So without any further ado, I'll hand back to Sandy to start talking about the I space.
Sandy, you're just talking about the we stuff at the moment, but we need to pop you. Cool. Thank you.
Is that okay? Hello?
Yep, that's all good. Thanks, Sandy.
All right. Hi, look, introducing that the I part of the model Steve is referring to. And I chose this slogan, Mental Health Begins With Me, which was used during Mental Health Week earlier this month, because it seems to be a good reminder and a good way to introduce the I part. But certainly being involved in early childhood education and care can be both rewarding and enjoyable, but also challenging and an emotionally, physically and intellectually demanding role, as well as all the responsibilities involved in education and care of young children. There might also be challenging workplace demands, things like high turnover of staff, changing roles, professional isolation, and sometimes these demands can take their toll and lead to stress and burnout. In order to fulfil these roles, the roles of the job, educators need to know how to look after themselves by managing their stress and learning to restore a sense of balance to their lives. In fact, I was just listening to a podcast from Adriana Huffington from the Huffington Post yesterday, and she was talking about burnout as being the disease of civilization. And she made a, humorous analogy, I guess, about that we actually take a lot more care of our phones than we do of our own well-being, that we know how charged our phones are, and that if they're running low, well, we look around for all those places to actually connect and recharge them again. And are we actually as aware of how we're running, of how charged we are, and what we need to do to, I guess, rebalance our lives? So we're going to start with a poll to see what people are already doing to nurture themselves, or, in other words, care for their mental health. So I'll hand back to you, Amelia.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Sandy. I'll just pop the poll up for you. We've started that now. So what is it that you do to nurture yourself or look after your own mental health? Now, this is a multiple choice question, so feel free to answer more than one. What sort of things do you do, Steve and Sandy?
Exercise is a big one for me. And also I have, over the last year, learnt about the importance of sleep. And so working very hard to make sure I get a good night's sleep. It sounds a bit strange, but very important to myself.
Yeah, put yourself to bed on time and do those sort of things. And I must admit, I try and do the exercise thing too. And what I find, sometimes it's really hard to do it, but always, once you finish the exercise, you feel so much better. So it's important to sort of try and hold and remember what it feels like at the end rather than what it feels like at the beginning and even during, I suppose, isn't it? How about you, Sandy?
Well, look, I've certainly remembered that sleep is actually critical for me, and that those hours that when we sleep are not actually hours that I could just use for catching up on all the things that I need to get done. And that is not a very helpful or useful way of spending my time. So it's much more efficient and better for my mental health to get a good night's sleep. Yep. And then getting up and doing some exercise and getting going for the day.
Yeah, and these poll results, so they reflect a lot of, they're pretty even across the board, really, don't you? I think you probably agree. But I can see that a lot of these reflect things that both of you will be talking about a little bit in the future, things around being active and being connected and enjoying what you're doing is really, really important. So what we'll do now, I'll just...
going to say, Amelia, certainly like Dan Siegel talks about mental health basics. So when he talks about that, he's talking about sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And to me, nutrition includes water because I'm a big water fan as well. And I think they're really good just to keep in mind and keep coming back to.
Definitely. So I think Steve, you're going to be talking a little bit more now. Is that right? Oh no, it's still Sandy. And it's a topic, I've just moved the slide on for you, Sandy. It's a topic that both you and Steve have just touched on, actually, about important self-care.
It could become the theme for the day, Amelia.
It could.
But everyone don't fall asleep at the moment, please.
No, wake up, everyone.
I don't know. I think that could be a very beneficial outcome. Look, I put this slide up just to remind us about that. We need to make sleep a priority in our lives, that it is important, and that many people do. It is, for many people, is the first thing that we give up when we want to fit more things into our lives. But our bodies and our brains need sleep, and even small amounts of sleep deprivation will make a difference to how we cope, physically, emotionally, and intellectually. Okay. Look, you may have heard of Act, Belong, Commit. It's a WA-based health promotion campaign that encourages individuals to take action to promote and protect their own mental health and wellbeing, and encourages organisations that provide mentally healthy activities to promote participation in those activities. I caught up with Amber Lee Laws, the campaign manager of Act, Belong, Commit, a couple of weeks ago, and asked us if she could just tell us what Act, Commit is about, what it looks like, and how it originated. And we have here a recording from that interview.
When I was 14, I started getting really sick. Then I got put into a clinic for depression and anxiety disorder. Now I'm at uni and I'm studying photography. Photography is my ambition. It is my motivation. It is what helps me with my relationships and friendships. I hope to go around the world, take photos of bands that everybody knows the names of. Now, I feel good about myself. I definitely think that people would benefit from the Act, Belong, Commit message. Act, Belong, Commit has changed my life.
To find out how you can Act, Belong, Commit, visit this website or call the number.
Excellent. Thanks, Sandy. That was a little advert about Act, Belong, Commit. Should we play the audio now, do you think? I'll pop it up now for you if you like, the audio. Okay. There we go. We'll just play that now. This is the conversation with Amber Lee and Sandy.
To keep mentally healthy. So we're targeting the whole of the West Australian population and encouraging people to take action to protect and promote their mental health. So the Act, Belong, Commit guidelines for mental health recommend that we keep active in as many ways as we can, not only physically, but also socially, cognitively and spiritually as well. We encourage people to get involved in the community and belong to community groups. So that could be participating in a sports club or an arts group or a volunteering group, an environmental group, whatever it is that your interest areas are. and make commitments to those activities that you engage in, because when we know that when people put in extra effort to those activities, that they reap so much more reward out of it, so that in turn boosts their mental health and well-being. So that's the message in a nutshell. In terms of how it was developed, it came, I guess, first part of Actable on Commit came about in 2002 when Healthway, which is the West Australian Health Promotion Foundation, were looking at their health priority areas, and they thought, why isn't anyone doing anything to boost population mental health? There's lots of mental health programs out there, or there were at the time, but there was no one really dealing with positive mental health and trying to really increase the resiliency of the whole West Australian community. So at that time they engaged Professor Rob Donovan to undertake some scoping research to find out what people thought about mental health and what sorts of things they thought people could do to look after their mental health and well-being. So that initial research had two main findings. The first one was when we say the words mental health, we think mental illness. So as I think we all know, when we say mental health, people associate terms like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, Greylands Hospital, those sorts of things. But when we say the words mentally healthy, people conjure up much more positive terms, like socially adept and able to cope and able to maintain good relationships and be productive and so on. And the second finding was that people generally agreed that keeping active, getting involved in the community, having a sense of belonging and having a reason to get out of bed in the morning is fundamental to good mental health and well-being. So that's how the words act, belong and commit fell out from that research, because people said be active, they said you have to have the sense of belonging, and time again people said you have to make commitments to the activities that you engage in to then reap those mental health benefits.
I know on the website there's a huge array of interactive tools, resources, people's stories, but just one in particular I was going to ask if you could talk a bit more about, which is the fairly recently released Guide to Keeping Mentally Healthy.
Yeah, definitely. So we developed the Guide to Keeping Mentally Healthy in response to a number of phone calls we were receiving from members of the community who recognised that they needed to act, belong, commit to improve their mental health and well-being. Perhaps they were socially isolated, or they didn't feel that they had meaning and purpose in life, but they didn't really know how to go about it. And we do provide a service whereby we help people find activities in their local area, but we recognise just simply giving them the information of what clubs and groups and activities were out there wasn't enough. So we developed the Guide to Keeping Mentally Healthy to help people make goals to act, belong, commit, and give them tips to how to join a group and how to find activities that they're really going to engage in and really enjoy, and how to get more out of life. So the guide is for a broader audience of people. It's for people who are mentally healthy and want to stay that way.
Right.
As well as people who might be feeling a bit low and want to get more out of life, as well as those that have a mental illness or have had a mental health problem and are looking for positive ways to build their resiliency to help with their recovery.
Great.
So really it's for everyone, no problem.
Look, just before we wrap it up, because we're going to have a look at one of your adverts as well, one of the three featuring Garth, Ashley and Lorraine. Can you just give us a bit of background about how that came about?
Sure. So most people in Western Australia should be familiar with our 30-second animated ad, which briefly describes what Act, Belong, Commit is all about. So a couple of years ago, we decided to build upon that advertising campaign by bringing in real-life Western Australian people who had used Act, Belong, Commit as a way to stay mentally healthy, to get more out of life, or to help them recover from a mental illness. So those adverts are all available on our website, and hopefully you'll see them on TV as well.
Thank you, Amberly, so much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sandy. That was an excellent interview to be able to listen to. I'm actually really surprised that the Act, Belong, Commit has been going since 2002. That really shows what a great initiative it is to have that much longevity. And I liked what Amberly was saying around how they really target everyone in across Australia, regardless of what how your mental health is at the moment. It can help people whose mental health is good at the moment, but also for those people who do need some extra support. And I really like that whole notion that you act and you belong to something that you feel passionate about, and that you can be creative in how you do commit those things. So I'm not sure if we might have another advert that we can watch. One
more, I think. Yeah, that was here to play. Mm.
So would you like to make a little comment at all while we pop those up?
Certainly. Act Belong Commit, although it's WA based, it's got an amazing website, and the resources and the ideas and the partnerships are all available there for everyone to access. And I know it has been taken up in other states throughout Australia, and in fact worldwide as well. For me, I really love that message. I think it's a very, and in fact worldwide as well. For me, I really love that message. I think it's a very easy one and really resonates with a lot of people.
Even the tagline, a great way to live, and it really is a great way to live. So we watched the first one, Ashley's story. So now we're going to have a little look at Garth's story. So I'll just play that for us now. Thank you.
Every single firefighter is here because they want to make the community safer. It can be a very trying job at times, both physically and mentally. There's a lot of stress in the job. You've always got to be ready and aware. I'm lucky I belong to a great group of guys here, and the belonging to that group actually helps. I've organised a large group of firefighters to do the 1% for the last couple of years. It just gives you something to focus on, something to enjoy, as well as helping your own mental stress. I saw the Act Belong Commit television commercials. I look back in my life and I realised that Act Belong Commit is just a way I've lived my life. If everyone took it on, everyone would be much healthier and happier. This is a great way to live life.
To find out how you can Act Belong Commit, visit this website or call the number.
Excellent. And some people have been asking in the chat whether or not these ads and these films are available. And yes, you can access the adverts that Sandy's provided by the Act Belong Commit website, which Cara has popped in for us. Thanks for that, Cara. And also the interview with Amberley, we'll have that as part of the recording of this webinar, but we might even pop that up as a blog post on our shared thinking, Sandy, because it was really, really interesting to have that conversation with her, sounds like. So I'll hand over to you again now, Sandy.
Okay, thanks. We'll just move on to, and just still on the Act Belong Commit theme, just asking everyone if there's one thing that you think that you could do to either act, belong or commit. If you go onto the Act Belong Commit website, you'll see a number of pledges that people have made, things like, I'm going to join the cricket club as a treasurer, I'm going to start each day by thinking how great it is to be alive, I'm going to commit to Bollywood funk dance classes or learn to play chess, invite my neighbours over for dinner, a whole range of things that obviously are important to different people. And as you think about it and think about if there is one thing today that you might like to, I guess, pledge to act, belong or commit, I guess the next challenge is how are you going to keep it happening? How do you make it stick, really? And I wonder if there are any of you who sometimes have thought, everything, I'm not coping or it's all too much. And then you realise that you really haven't been able to keep to that idea of maybe walking every morning that you promised yourself that you'd do, and something that actually keeps you balanced in life. I think in the busyness and the demands and the rush, it's actually really easy to forget about some of these things. So it's worthwhile thinking, how do we actually incorporate some of these ideas into our lives so that they do become a regular routine part. As I say, with Act Belong Commit, they talk about people pledging, so making a promise in writing and letting other people know about it, which is something I did recently myself. I was going to listen to a mindfulness summit, listen every day and sent that out as an email to let people know that that's what I was doing. And although I don't actually get to do it every single day, it has been regular, and I don't beat myself up when I can't. I think that's the other side of being good and kind to yourself. Another idea is simply to commit to something with someone, such as exercise, which is always great to do it with someone. Even if it's, and I was reading recently about a woman who was walking around the airport while waiting for a plane to get her steps up on the pedometer, and then because she was part of the group and they all texted and encouraged each other to reach their targets. So you can actually be part of a virtual group, and that works just as well. The idea too about rituals, about making something so you don't even really have to think about it, that you might, by attaching a new activity to something that you're already doing on a regular basis. And I guess just as a very simple idea, I enjoy having a cup of tea or four during the day. And the idea of, to me, one of my mental health basics is to learn to take that mindful minute and just breathe for 1 minute. And the idea of linking that to actually having a cup of tea, although, as Steve says, not at the same time, doesn't work. So we're going to move on to a poll and just have a think about what are some of the ways that you can remember to include these self-care ideas in your day.
Okay, I'm just popping the poll up now for us, Sandy. So Steve, there's been a bit happening in the chat. Is there anything in particular that has struck your attention? I'll just pop that poll up for people. Have a look at.
Yeah, I like the ideas we've all got in there. Interesting, I just noticed that one about the adult colouring in book. I've noticed a number of people have started to talk about that as a nice way of relaxing. This is where it's really good to know yourself. For me, colouring in is one of the most stressful things I can do. I failed at it. I know it's just about impossible to fail colouring in, but I did.
You can't keep in the line.
No, keeping in the line. So it's really interesting
that doesn't matter.
Well, that's right. That's right. True colouring, and that's what I used to tell my teachers, but they didn't agree with me. But it's a great one. It's great that there are so many ideas out there that we can do now.
Yeah, I was thinking too, this is my pet theme obviously for the day, but ways to actually remember to make self-care a priority. For me, it again comes down to sleep, because as soon as I'm not sleeping enough, I forget about all these structures or ideas or things that are really good for me to be feeling that I'm managing and coping with my life. And once I get a bit of sleep, then I start remembering and it all comes back.
That made me think of what I mentioned earlier about having your cup full. So maybe for you, having sleep is something that fills your cup, so then you're able to pour from it. So we I've just stopped the poll as well, and the winner has been making it a ritual activity in your life. And I know, Steve and Sandy, you're both going to touch on that shortly. So is there anything else you'd like to add before we move on, or should we see what's next?
No, just from a science point of view, just backing up Sandy's point around sleep, what all of the research around our own wellbeing is telling us is that sleep is the fundamental aspect of wellbeing, that if we're not getting enough sleep, then everything else we're doing is not going to be as effective. So there's a lot of research, a lot of science around that particular construct at the moment. So I just encourage people, if you're going to focus on one thing, that's probably the most important.
Excellent. Thanks. So number one tip there. Great. So we're moving on to the next bit now. And Sandy, you're going to be talking with us a little bit more about mindfulness.
Yes, look, we just chose a couple of areas to focus on in terms of that I part. So really looking at belong, commit, and also mindfulness. And I will ask if you've already come across mindfulness, but I can see from the chat that there's been quite a bit of chat about mindfulness too. And I think certainly interest in mindfulness is growing everywhere, and particularly in education and the corporate world as well. Look at mindfulness. It's a clinically proven tool to support wellbeing and mental health by reducing stress and allowing life to be experienced more fully. On the Kids Better website, we actually have a definition for mindfulness, and I'll read it out. It says, mindfulness is a whole body-mind state of awareness that involves tuning into the present moment with openness and curiosity. It is a state of being, it's a state of being fully awake to life, being aware and undistracted in the present moment. It is about focusing attention on the present rather than thinking about the past or worrying about the future, which is our brain's default mode. Mindful awareness is something that we all possess and can be strengthened through practice. Just as we exercise our body, mindfulness is about exercising our mind. So mindfulness can be developed through formal sitting meditation practices or through informal everyday mindfulness activities that uses the senses to anchor the attention. Things like mindful walking, eating, listening to music. And earlier on, just before the webinar started, Amelia was telling us about mindfully washing the dishes. So I think that's a new way to look at it as well. But certainly the research around mindfulness is compelling and has been shown to reduce in children. It's been shown to reduce the severity of depression, anxiety and ADHD, as well as building resilience by giving children more skills to actually cope with the challenges that they face. If you'd like to find out more about mindfulness, certainly be worthwhile having a look at the Smiling Minds website, which is linked, you can get to from Kids Matter website as well. And there is also a book by Patricia A. Jennings, which is fantastic about mindfulness within the classroom, and that'll be included on the resource list that goes out after the webinar. Look, I love children's storybooks, and they can be great for exploring ideas and discussing with children. And I came across this book by Kerry McLean called Moody Cow Meditates that you might like. I was going to read a bit of it, but I'll just give you a very quick idea of what it's about. And it all starts one stupid, rotten day when everything goes wrong. Peter the cow is having a bad day. After missing the bus and wiping out on his bike, he loses his temper and gets into trouble. To make matters worse, all the other kids are teasing him, calling him Moody Cow. Peter's day just seems to get worse until his father comes over and teaches him how to settle his mind and let go of his frustration through a simple and fun exercise. So I'll include that in the resource list if you're interested in following it up, and just click through a couple of the pictures and slides from it. And instead, oh, sorry, okay, for 1 second, yes. Actually going to hand over to one of the other Kids Matter Early Childhood facilitators, Rita Johnston, who's based in Sydney, although up the coast, I think, just at the moment, who's actually going to take us all through a 1 minute breathing exercise, which might like to think about, even in the middle of a furious and frantic day with lots of demands, that you can take just a minute to refocus and regroup. So thank you, Rita.
Thanks, Sandy. There we are. As you're speaking about mindfulness, I was thinking about my own experiences and about how in the past my mind had a life of its own and was really in charge of my life. But since I've been regularly doing mindfulness practice, I feel like I'm now much more in charge of my mind. So let's talk about one mindful minute. We probably all know by now that breathing or the breath is a way to calm ourselves, and we've read that and we've told that, and we may use it with ourselves and with children. But do we really know why it works? And I found out quite recently about something called the variable heart rate. Now, I thought that the heart basically beat at a steady rhythm, and if we got excited, it got faster, and if we were calm, it went slower. But actually, the heart increases its rhythm, its pace of beating on the in-breath, and then it slows down on the out-breath. So that when we're stressed and upset, we tend to go and breathe in a lot, and so we're making our heart beat faster and faster. And if we need to run from a tiger, that's probably a really good thing to be doing.
but if it's just something that's annoying us in our day, it's not very helpful. And when we breathe out slowly, our heart rate slows down. So when we start to focus on the breath and let it become rhythmic going in and going out, or even breathing in deep and then breathing out long, we'll find that we start to calm really quickly because we're actually lowering our heart rate. And this is how focusing on the breath for only a minute can really help change your state and bring you back to regulation. However, I want to say a very important thing, that for some people who've had a lot of trauma in their lives and a lot of trauma in their childhood, focusing on the breath or the body can sometimes start to release some of these locked up trauma sensations. So you might really need some help and some coaching before you want to try these practices. So start tuning into yourself, and if you're finding this doesn't work for you, then do a bit of help seeking to find out what will work for you. Rick Hansen says that if you tend to dissociate or get flooded with painful feelings when you relax into yourself, you may need to build up more inner resources before meditating. So we can do this through counselling and other trauma-based interventions. However, for the moment, let's just try breathing for 1 mindful minute. These words came from the Mindfulness Summit. Find quiet space where you will have no distractions for 1 minute. If you like, you can set a timer on your phone or watch for 1 minute. Otherwise, you can just estimate roughly a minute, about 20 breaths. Then for this 1 mindful minute, all you do is focus on the sensations of your breathing. That's it. It's that simple, just tuning into the breath for 1 mindful minute. You might notice your senses becoming sharper as you take this 1 mindful minute. You might notice a sense of grounding or calm. You may become more in touch with how you're feeling and what you're thinking. Take notice of how this mindfulness minute affects you, and feel free to practice this several times today if you like. After all, your mind is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. So let's take a moment now to all together take those 20 mindful breaths. Sitting comfortably in your chair, relaxing your body and focusing on your breath going in and out. You might find your mind getting distracted even in this minute. That's okay. Bring your attention back to the breath, going in through your nose and out. A minute can feel like a very long time when you're just focusing on the breath. So bring your awareness back to the breath. Really relax into the breath. Now bring your attention back to the webinar. Thank you, Sandy.
Excellent, Rita. It's Amelia here. Thank you for that. And you're right, a minute is a very long time, especially when you're in a webinar space. I was thinking, oh, I'm sure it's a minute now, but it was very good to take pause and have a little bit of a breath and some deep breathing and to refocus for the rest of the session, because we are changing track a little bit now. Steve will be joining us now and talking about what workplaces can do to support wellbeing for educators. So I'll hand over to you now, Steve. I'll just progress the slide for you.
Thanks, Amelia. It's very interesting that 60 seconds, one of the ideas we talk about and actually get people to practice in our workshops around stress is actually the 60-second break, and how it can release all of, just the 60-second breathing exercise can release all of those stress hormones out of our system. And kind of challenging the idea that we don't have time throughout the day to do it. So thank you, Rita. That was a great illustration, and I'd encourage people to try and pick that up in their workplace. So as we look at the space between us, when we work, we generally work with other people. It'd be great sometimes that if we could just work on our own and just do things on our own, but that's not the way workplaces go, and it's particularly not the setting that we work in. And so we are surrounded by people, and we need to understand the impact, one, that we have on them, but also that they have on us. And a way of understanding this is that we can be in a very good place ourselves. We could have spent a mindful morning, we could have spent a mindful week, be doing fantastically, and we come to work, we have an interaction, and that can take all of the energy and all of the wind out of our sails. So this space of what happens between us and understanding how to improve that, the part we play in that, but also the part as a centre that we can play in that is very important. One of the ideas that we like to talk about is that we all have our own theories about how life works. As psychologists, we call that our mental model or our paradigm. And so, for example, if, and I'll use a very simple illustration, if I'm a bit more of an extroverted personality, which means I get my energy from being around people, I kind of have this unconscious bias that that's what everybody else does. Whereas if I have more of an introverted personality and I get my energy from my quiet time, my alone time, I tend to perceive that's how other people get their energy. And when we're working with others, we have a mixture of those and a mixture of much more complex ideas going on. The other important part to understand about our unconscious biasnesses is that they tend to show up in three settings. One is when we're tired, so either physically, mentally, emotionally, which is why we've talked about sleep a lot. Also when we're stressed, and different people are stressed by different circumstances, different reactions, and often the stress can have nothing to do with work. It can be outside of work that we bring into the workplace. The other really interesting space that we don't appreciate, but it has a tremendous impact upon how we act, is when we're comfortable in a setting. So if we've been working somewhere for a long time, we feel comfortable with those people around us, but sometimes we become less aware of the impact that we have on others. And a nice way of understanding this is if you go to a party for the first time or somewhere for the first time, you tend to be reasonably aware of the impact that you're having on other people. But as you get to know those people, you know, maybe you've gone there lots and lots of times, you become a lot more comfortable and you start to relax and you start to let your guard down, which is a good thing, but it can also mean that some of those behaviours that aren't useful in a team setting can start to play out. I want to speak about two attitudes that are probably the foundation of teams that are functioning well when it comes to supporting wellbeing and teams that aren't. And it's a bit of a paradigm about how we approach the world, and Sandy alluded to this a little earlier. The first is what we call a knower, so that's a K-N-O-W-E-R, a knower mindset. So this is somebody who has a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, like we all do in our different settings, but it comes with a certain level of what we call arrogance, and it plays out a little bit like this, and I'm going to pick on Brussels sprouts. So if someone offers me a plate of Brussels sprouts and I have a knower attitude, I say things like, those Brussels sprouts are disgusting, take them away from me. Whereas if I have a learner attitude, I still don't like Brussels sprouts, but I express myself slightly differently. I say, I don't like Brussels sprouts, I don't want those, feel free to offer them to other people. It's a very subtle change, but the learner attitude, which is the one that grows good teams, is that attitude of where we have our expertise, we know what we're talking about, but we're curious or interested in what other people have to say. And what we found through a lot of our work is that the knower attitude in a team will destroy a team, whereas a learner attitude in a team, that preparedness to learn, the curiosity, is what grows a team. So it's something that we often encourage teams to think about and workplaces to think about, is how do we encourage and promote the learner attitude? How do we call ourselves, and how do we question other people if what we're starting to see is a knower attitude? So my challenge in terms of growing that we space is to think about yourself and to think about how often do you display the learn attitude, and how often do you just think about how often do you display the learn attitude and how often do you display the kind of know attitude? So that's one attitude that I think is important. The other thing to realise, and we've talked about this before, so I won't spend much time on this, is that we actually do have an impact on children. There's plenty of research that talks about what happens between the educators influences the children. So again, if we're tired or stressed, then that will have an impact on the children. The way that we talk between ourselves, the way that we act between ourselves, even displaying that knower attitude will have an influence. A question that we're sometimes asked is, well, what difference can I make? And I love this quote by the Dalai Lama. If you think you are too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. And we've all kind of experienced this idea of you know, that the workplace is a setting that I can't necessarily change. And I'd like to challenge that idea a little bit and to say, you know, there are things that we can do that can influence those around us. And so this quote might be useful. Another great quote around mosquitoes is, even a mosquito gets a slap on its back for its work, but that's slightly different. Thinking about a team, a question to ask, and I think this is a useful question to ask within our staff settings and when we have our meetings, is what footprint are we leaving? So what footprint are we leaving individually, and what footprint are we leaving as a group? So wherever I go as an individual, I leave a footprint, and that's made up by my personality, that's made up by the way I interact with other people, it's the way I respect or don't respect other people. Also as a team, we leave a footprint on our children's lives. And I'd just like to deviate briefly just around the idea of multitasking, and I have to say that this is not just because I'm a male, but the science around multitasking is in, and the science doesn't back up this idea of multitasking. In fact, the research that has been shown shows that when we try and multitask, not only do we end up spending 25% longer on anything, but it also ends up making us more stressed. Now, obviously, when we've got you know, lots of competing demands, it's going to happen. But the idea is that there's more about multitasking that we can do to try and focus on a couple of things at a time, or one thing at a time. Because multitasking, as I said, does make us stress. So as a team, if we're constantly multitasking, then what we're doing is creating this stressful kind of environment. We're creating a chaotic type of environment. So something to think about in that process is, how do we create this sense of community, which, and one of the reasons I love the Kids Matter Early Childhood and Kids Matter Primary frameworks, is this idea of creating a positive community. And this idea of conversation. Conversation is so important in creating a community. It's not just what we think is going on, but it's actually allowing time for those important conversations. There's, again, lots of research in this space around this idea of social capital, that the more that we allow, that the more that we have conversations about things that really matter, the more likely we are as a team to deal with those things that really matter. It creates connection. So some of the conversations we can have, for example, is, how do we solve problems? How do we blow off steam? So how do we deal with stress? If, for example, somebody is stressed and they want to take 60 seconds to do that mindful minute, or 2 minutes to do that mindful minute, how do we create that, and how do we allow that particular person to do those things? And for me, that's a really important part of creating community. How do we re-engage? How do we transition into the workplace? How do we transition out of the workplace? When we're talking about our community, what are the norms? So in other words, what are our team agreements about how we solve a problem? It sounds like a very practical idea. Do we just solve problems on the fly, or have we actually had a conversation about our process for how we solve problems? Often in organisations, often in education, often in schools, doesn't matter where we are, we assume that we are all operating on the same mindset. And as I said earlier, if we're thinking about the fact that we do have different mindsets, if we're thinking about our footprint, then actually having that conversation about how do we actually solve those problems. So in terms of creating a positive workplace culture, there are a couple of ideas, and just as I talk this through, I just want to refer you to the Heads Up site. It's a fantastic site around creating a mentally healthy workplace. And again, a lot of great resources on there. It's also put together by Beyond Blue and a couple of other agencies as well. And it is one that I'd encourage you to look at. There are some audit tools, etc. But a couple of the ideas that come out around creating a mentally healthy workplace are having agreed language around dealing with stress. So when we're stressed, is it okay to have a conversation and say, guys, today I'm a little bit stressed. I'm going to need a bit of support here. I'm just going to need to take some time off to actually have those conversations. Prior to this meeting, I had a coaching session with a client who works in a large corporation. He's executive manager and had just taken 8 weeks stress leave. And one of the things he said to me when he came back, he said, I never talked about the fact that I was stressed. I never talked about this. In our workplace, we don't do this. He said, but since I've got back, I've started to talk to people about this idea. And what's really important, he said, is that other people are saying, wow, I never knew that this, I never knew you're in that boat. I'm also in the same boat. And so this idea of vulnerability, providing opportunities to share time together. So how do we do that as a group? And also bringing new people into the team. How do we support those people? The last thing I'd like to say here before we close out is a great piece of advice I once heard was, if everybody in the workplace is smiling and deliberately tries to smile, it'll do wonders for the workplace atmosphere. So in terms of a helpful tip for ourselves, a smile on the face is important. Sandy, the transition ritual, did you want to have a bit of a conversation? I'll kick this off and then we can jump in here in terms of looking after yourself.
Go for it, Steve. Yes. No,
So the transition ritual is one of the ideas we talk to people to say, when you leave work, what is the thing that you do to make sure that you actually leave work? So that when you arrive home, you're present at home. This is an idea from something called the Energy Project, and it's in your resource section. The website's there. There's a great Facebook account. So a question I would like to ask people is, what could you do when you leave work to make sure that when you get home, you actually are in that place to be home? There's some ideas here. One of the ideas I say, because it sounds so counterintuitive, but it works. Somebody told me once that what they do is that they have a signpost on the way home, and they have an hour drive. When they get to that signpost, if they're still thinking about work, they turn the car around and drive back to work. When I said to them, well, how many times have you been back to work? They said, never. They said, because if I have to turn the car around, I say to myself, stop, concentrate on something else. So it's a great little technique to manage our own energy in this particular space. Sandy.
Thanks, Steve. And I think that was a fantastic example. I think the time's actually moving on, so I think we'll move on to the poll.
Yeah, I've just popped the poll up for you so that we can have some ideas. And I think, Sandy and Steve, you were hoping that people could maybe think about what they do already, or if they haven't consciously or intentionally thought about what they could do already, maybe use this as a bit of an action plan for what they might do today on their way home from work. So,
brilliant point. I was just going to say that. That's a brilliant point. To actually think about today, not tomorrow, not the future, but today.
Yeah, and it is really about taking one day at a time. And I think also alluding to something that Sandy said earlier around being easy on yourself. Like if the slip does happen, like there's no point trying to take care of yourself and then you're just going to beat yourself up for it by not taking care of yourself. It sort of defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
So just wanted to mention too, Amelia, that for some people, and certainly from time to time, I work from home, so really have to consciously think of how do you transition when you're at home and then being at home from one role to another. And I certainly find one way is to simply have a room that is for work, and that's what I do when I'm in that room. And when I leave it, I'm actually present as part of a family member at that stage.
Yeah, that's really important, and I can speak for that too because I work from home quite a lot, and I also find changing out of my work clothes is a really important thing too. Yeah, are there any final points that you'd like to make, Steve, and Sandy, before I start talking about how we can keep caring for ourselves via the Kids Matter framework?
Other than reiterating that point about Give it a go. If you forget to do it, it's okay. Give it a go tomorrow.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Don't be hard on yourself.
Thanks, Sandy. What about you?
Hopefully people will go home thinking about how they're going to transition from work to home, and also how they're going to have a good night's sleep.
Yes. I knew you'd say something about the sleep. You'd have to say something about the sleep.
I would, yeah.
Very big thing. Now, we've had lots of questions today in the chat as well, and some of them we haven't had a chance to get to. This is such a big topic and such an important topic. But what we might do is we'll have a look at the transcript and we'll see if we can respond to some of those either via Facebook or via our Shared Thinking blog in the after the webinar comments. You will all receive a certificate, and you will also receive a notification of when this recording is available, so you can share it with members of your community as well. And on that recording there will also be a PDF of the slides made available, and some details around where some of these images and graphics came from too. This second to last slide that we've got up, and time has passed now, so I'd like you all to take a moment shortly and complete the survey and make sure you fill in the names of people who have attended. But thank you all for attending today. These links are live, and they will be live in the PDF as well. And they're just little tips around places that we can go to actually continue on the self-care and workplace self-care using the Kids Matter framework. So whatever component you're working on at the moment, if you are an official participant, you can find something around adult self-care in each of these components. But if you're not an official participating Kids Matter service or school, there are still many opportunities to become one of the official participants and get the support of people like Sandy and Rita, who can help guide you through implementing the Kids Matter framework. So once again, thanks everyone for attending today, and thank you Steve and Sandy for your conversation. It's been a really easy, free-flowing conversation. It's generated lots of reflective practice throughout the chat that I can see already as well. So thanks to everyone who's been involved today for attending, and remember, if anyone's wanting to place a focus on getting started with Kids Matter Early Childhood, just get in contact with us and we can help you get in the right direction to get started as soon as you can. So all these links are live, and please continue to keep the conversation going. Thanks everyone for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.
See ya.
Bye everyone.